Good morning or afternoon or evening, LAPCS scholars. This is Mr. Rowley. Today we're going to do part 3 of Monroe and the Era of Good Feelings. Now, one thing to make sure you're doing is make sure you have your graphic organizer that you started on Monday, okay, because you're going to answer Wednesday's question. Okay, so Monroe and Era of Good Feelings, part 3. First up is the Panic of 1819. Causes of the Panic of 1819 were over-speculation on frontier lands. That's all the land out west. People were making it sound like it was worth much more money than it ended up being in reality. The Bank of the United States forced what they called wildcat Western banks to foreclose on farms. So all these banks that were out there that were localized banks were being forced to foreclose on farms, take people's farms from them. The Bank of the United States stopped allowing payment in paper, now demanded payment in specie, which is not something that the farmers had. So state banks affected and called in loans in specie, and many farmers didn't have specie, so they lost their farms. So they just literally changed the way money worked. It's crazy. They changed the value. All the money that the farmers had absolutely no value. Can you imagine that? Results of the Panic of 1819, Western farmers begin to view the bank as an evil financial monster, which makes sense when, there's a type of money that is changed and you can't pay your bills. Hard-hit poor classes looking for more responsive government. New land legislation or laws resulted in smaller parcels being sold for lower prices. Widespread sentiment to end the practice of imprisoning debtors. So basically, there was a practice they wanted the people that owed money not to be put in prison. Here we go with the 1820 election. So the Democratic Republic, which was Monroe, who was currently in the presidency, easily won, 99.5%. It's crazy. The growing West, 9 new states joined the Union between 1791 and 1819. Most had been admitted alternately free and slave. So we're really getting into the nitty-gritty here with slavery issues. So about half of the new states were brought in as slave states. Half those new states were brought in as free states where slavery was illegal. Maintaining a sectional balance of Congress was the supreme goal. So in other words, they wanted about half the people in Congress to be for slavery, about half to be against it. That way it's a balance. What were reasons for Western expansion? Well, movement had been significant in the West since the colonial era. Cheap lands in Ohio Territory attracted thousands of European immigrants. Land exhaustion in older tobacco states drove people westward. So all the old tobacco fields were starting to not be able to yield any tobacco, so people had to move on. Speculators had accepted small down payments and made purchase of land easier. So you put a little bit of money down, you got your farm. And you paid your loan to the bank. Economic depression during the embargo years sparked migration westward. Remember the embargo, where right before the War of 1812? Reasons for westward expansion continued. So the defeat of Native Americans in previous decades cleared away much of the frontier. So during all this time, there were wars against against the natives of the lands. One of the battles was Battle of Fallen Timbers of 1794, and then Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. And the hero of the Battle of Canoe, the hero in terms of the American side anyway, was none other than Andrew Jackson, who we will be talking about a lot more coming up. Transportation revolution improved land routes to Ohio Valley. So basically being able to get one from one end of the country to the other was starting to open up. Cumberland Road began in 1811 from Maryland to Illinois. The advent of the steamboat in 1811 made upstream travel possible. Before, you can't just paddle a huge boat, so you would have no way to motor up a river. but now you can go against the current because of the steamboat, the steam engine. Canals beginning in 1826 allowed for increased trade between east and west. So canals were built. Like they would take one body of water to another and build basically they dig a gigantic trench between the two, and that's a canal. Like this one. The West still remained weak in population and influence, but it allied with other sections regarding national political issues, such as slavery, demanded land reform and cheap transportation, cheap money, created its own wildcat banks, and fought the Bank of the United States. The Missouri Compromise. Now, make sure you're paying close attention to this because the Missouri Compromise is something that you are going to answer a question for at the end of this, and it should be on your graphic organizer. Missouri asked Congress to enter the Union in 1819, become a state, led to the debate over the Talmadge Amendment, causing for the end of slavery in Missouri in a generation. So end of slavery would theoretically happen over a period of time. But no more slaves could be brought over into Missouri. So any slaves that were there were okay, but new slaves were not allowed. And that's Talmadge. Southerners viewed Talmadge's amendment as a huge threat to sectional balance, led to a concern about the future of the slave system. So basically what the concern was that if they're going to set it up so that slavery is okay for a certain amount of time and then phased out, then that's going to reduce the Southern strength in terms of influence. Missouri was the first state entirely west of the Mississippi Way made from the Louisiana Territory. Remember the Louisiana Purchase when President Jefferson bought all that land from Napoleon in France. Talmadge Amendment might set a precedent for the rest of the region to be free, so that was what the Southerners were afraid of. Congress could abolish slavery in Missouri. It might try in other Southern states. That was the big concern. Henry Clay, heard that name before. He was a war hawk in the War of 1812, worked to negotiate a compromise. Provisions for the compromise, Congress agreed to admit Missouri as a slave state, but Maine would be admitted as a free state. Kept the sectional balance to 12-12 for the next 15 years. So compromise was really important because it eased the issues that people were having. Because we were getting ready for a big, huge debate and argument, but then this made it, oh, okay, we're calm now because we've got a balance. Future slavery was prohibited north of the 3630 line, the southern border of Missouri, which ironically, Missouri was north of the 3630 line. So here's a little map here. So if you take a look at this, here's the 3630 line right there. So anything up in here was supposed to be not slavery, okay? Compromise was largely accepted by both sides as long as things stayed balanced. South got Missouri. North won the concession that it could forbid slavery in the remaining territories above the 3630 line. The North had an advantage as Spanish territory in the Southwest prevented significant Southern expansion westward, but that would soon be dealt with. The Southerners were not too concerned about lands north of the 3630 as climate was not conducive to cash crop agriculture, which requires slave labor. All that, those cash crops like cotton and tobacco, Southerners felt that they needed a lot of slave labor. The legacy of the compromise, well, it lasted 34 years and preserved the Union until Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. We will talk about that. Slavery became a dominant issue in American politics. It was a serious setback in national unity. It literally split the country in half in terms of how people felt about things. The South began to develop a sectional nationalism of its own. So the North was feeling its own pride. The South was feeling its own pride. Look to the Western states. The South looked to the Western states who were seeking allies as well, because the Western states didn't have a lot of population, so they needed some help from somebody, so they were choosing the Southern. Henry Clay was later criticized by Northerners as an appeaser. In other words, he He's criticized that because the compromise really didn't change anything. It just kind of put another Band-Aid on this issue that was going to continue to be a problem. Okay, so here's the comprehension check. Okay, so I hope you're paying attention. You might need to go back and rewatch parts of it. So explain at least 5 sentences the Missouri Compromise. So just talk about the Missouri Compromise factually. How did this compromise ease people's fears? And how would that change the themes of their literature from the logic and fearful talk about the war during the Enlightenment? Okay, so answer this question. Should be on your graphic organizer. Share it with both myself and Miss Marks. And that is it for the day. See you tomorrow.